block at the top, right?
Yeah.
You just touch that, and then it'll go into this, all right? See the E-stop? Nothing's an E-stop. But you gotta have the green button. It gets rid of the E-stop, all right? If you don't have a green button, nothing's working. Now, if you don't have the E-stop and you can't get the green button on, it could be the light bulb's burned out.
Okay.
The new ones use LEDs, they don't burn out. But these, you unscrew this and you can get to the bulb and change it. All right. The other thing that can, all right, so let's go to the E-stops, all right? E-stop, the key switch. If the light's not on, the key switch is probably off. Okay, and you'll be going like, why is it an E-stop? Well, that's why it's an E-stop. Okay. E-stop.
También podemos hacerlo con algo por algo para
Hit the reset. In the back. Should go away. Blade guard.
Okay, I see your blade guard. Yeah.
There's the blade guard. It's got a switch. It'll stop the machine. It won't stop. The problem with this is if this is up, the blade's still spinning. It will slow down, but there's no brake on the motor, so it free spins. So you gotta be extremely careful if you open that.
Which we don't want to.
You don't want to.
No, never.
You should probably put a little
Latch there.
latch there.
Okay. It's a good idea.
It will do two things. It'll keep it from coming up off that little switch. Okay, and then it will forcibly not, you just know better than to open it up while the blade's spinning. So anytime that you get a fault, you have to hit the reset after fault. And you got the E-stop because the light's not on. All right. This is your start button. It engages everything. And I believe, nope, it's not tied into the machine circuitry. So that'll just stop your conveyor. It won't stop the machine. All right. So go machine out. Well, the first thing you have to do after you bring it up, go to the carriage. You got to home the carriage. Then you got to home the back gauge. The clamps come up
y eso camina. Vale.
and it moves forward, right? And then it goes to find a spot. And that's the limit switch on the other side. There's a little block that it hits. And what that does, that homing position is supposed to bring it to as close as you can so the clamps will still come down, but it won't land on top of the pusher bar. All right.
Okay.
So that's the purpose of the homing, and that gives it a reference. So if you go back, now it knows where they're at, approximately. You can change this back gauge position.
Alpha.
You can change the back gauge position on the homing in the machine setup page. It's called back gauge calibrate, all right? So what you do is after you home it, if you have any question whether or not it's right or not, you put a piece in there and you cut it and you measure it. And then you can enter that into that. So after we trim that today, we'll have to do that so that we know the exact where we're at.
Okay.
All right? But that's just a reference so that now it starts counting. 0 is the cut line, and it gets bigger as it goes back. All right? For the blade, it's a negative number because 0 is that wall. Anything on that side is a positive number. So in the setup page, the blade. Where are we at here? Size. Gotta find you. It's the carriage auto home position. So the home position is minus 27 or whatever it is right now, okay? The auto home position that it's set for right now means that it's gonna move quickly to here, 24 inches, which is right about this mark right here, before it starts making the cut. And then when it's done with the cut, that's where it's gonna come back to, okay? In the auto mode, that's where it comes back to. The carriage auto return position is how far it goes through the material, past zero. See, that's a positive number. You can change the auto home position. You don't have to put the negative in, it knows it has to be a negative, to whatever you want. So if you're running 8-inch material, we tell you to stay 3 to 4 inches off the material, because that way it gives the material room to move without your blade being too close to it, all right? If you're really comfortable with it, you can close that gap up to 1 inch or so. But when you first start it like that, be away from it and then start closing up the gap.
And that's what you mean that will cut down on
It cuts down on your cycle time,
cycle time. Got it.
and it cuts down on total movement of the blade, all right? So you can adjust the auto home and you can adjust the auto return, depending on the height of the material, to make sure that, you know, if you're cutting something like this, you probably only have to go 2 inches. If you're cutting something like this, you probably have to go the full 4 or maybe 6 inches. 6 is your max. Yeah? And it'll tell you that. 0 to 6.
Okay.
It won't work with 0. I don't know why it's there, but don't put 0 on because it won't stop right at 0. It has to go into the positive side.
Got it.
All right. That's just how our programmer's got it set up. So, with your auto home position, wow, 0 to 37. I'm telling you, you can't go 37 inches that way. You'll run out of space. 6 is the max that you can go.
So why it says 37?
Because this program was probably rewritten at some point.
Okay.
All right. Yep. That's the end of that screen.
Yeah. I want to make sure these guys see it.
All
I'm
right.
having a hard time seeing it.
All right. So 6 is about the max that you're going to be able to go over on that side. You might squeeze out 7. Your back gauge forward
Understand that
speed.
part, right? You understand that part as far as the okay.
The back gauge forward speed, 10 to 500. That's how fast it moves, pushing the material up, or when it comes in this direction. No reason to have it at 500 because it'll never reach 500. I mean, it could reach 500 from there to here, 500 inches a minute. But if you're cutting material and you're moving your material and you're doing a 12-inch piece, you're never going to reach 500 inches a minute anyway,
Yeah.
because it ramps up. It's not 0 to 500. It's not a race car.
It starts to push it.
Yeah,
slowly.
it picks
Gradually.
up speed as it goes. It's a servo, so it just keeps adding power until it reaches what it needs to do to get there. So 250, 175 to 250, 300 is about the max you need to go. Okay, if you're doing a bunch of small parts, you can leave it at 350. If you're doing bigger parts, longer parts, and you want to speed it up a little bit, go ahead. All right, yeah. The back gauge return speed up to 2,000 going back. It just gets it back there faster. Okay. Normally, 1,500 is where I put it. Anytime you make a change in here, hit the save button. What happens is, if it faults, if the power goes out, and you haven't hit the save button, it goes back to the old parameters.
So you're gonna have to redo everything.
So
anyway.
you have to redo everything. If you hit the save button, when it comes back up, it goes to the last thing that was saved. All right. I already covered the back gauge calibrate. The blade size, the kerf, the thickness of the blade, or the thickness of the cut. Different material will trim differently, so the kerf can change even with the same blade because it chips differently. So it may be bigger, or softer stuff tends to cave in and it gets smaller, which is really weird. But so your blade size, 10 to 16 on this one, 16 being your max. We didn't like that. Wrong button. There you go.
So as you put in a 12-inch, you would have to reset it.
Oh, you definitely want to reset it.
Okay.
All right. So we'll talk about that in just a second. So I showed you the auto home position, right? So if you're going to a smaller blade from a 16, say you put in a 12-inch blade from a 16 blade, and your auto home is 12, okay? And you put in a 12-inch blade, it's going to go to the it's going to go where it thinks it's 12 inches from the front of the bigger blade, not the smaller blade. So you're going to be further away. But just the opposite, if you have if you're telling it to go 4 inches in that direction, it's not going to do that. It's only going to go 2 inches because it thinks it was at the 4-inch position. So changing this blade size is a huge, huge, huge thing. If you go from a small blade to a big blade and you're using the auto home and you haven't put in the size of the big blade, you're going to crash that at 500 inches a minute into your material.
Got it.
So it's very critical to have the right size blade. All right. So you can change part numbers up to 150. The part numbers totally up to you. So you can keep a running chart saying, say this was part number 1, right? You can't really do a lot with it, but what you can do is you can save the setup for part 4 or part number 1, and you know that you have to use at least a 12-inch blade on this, all right? And all the parameters will be saved when you save it for that part. Then when you go to part number 1, see this changed? Things change with whatever it was you saved. So you can make a list. You can have however you want to do. You can use a spreadsheet or whatever, saying this is the blade side, these are the parameters, this is the kerf, so you kind of already know. Or you can call it, we have customers that don't do it by part, but they do it by blade. So blade number 1 is a 16-inch blade for them. All right, 16-inch blade has this kerf on it, and it has a serial number on it. So they know that part, this blade is blade number 1, we use it for. Excellent. So you can do it however you want to, but you can do it up to 150 times.
Okay.
All right, that's the whole thing.
And how do you get to the program again? To say if I wanted.
Just push the button. See, it changed. So it's in the machine setup.
Machine setup.
Yeah.
And then
that's where you set this up, and then this is also where you have to do your back gauge. Well, see, in part number 2, we have no back gauge caliber, we have no reverse speed, so nothing would work. Nothing would happen, and you wouldn't know what was happening. You can't have zeros. You got to have something in there. You got to have a speed. You got to have a size. You got to have other stuff going in it. So,
in order for it to operate.
In order for it to operate, you cannot have zeros.
Got it.
All right. So we're going to go back to blade number 4, or part 4, because that's where we were playing. So everything came back to that. We're back down to 40 inches a minute, 183 kerf, or 0.183 kerf, 16-inch blade. But that's what the whole part thing is for. So you can save it according to profiles, or you can save it according to blades. Okay. Number 1's usually left for 1 through 5. Most people don't list when they make these lists, because that's where they play with stuff. You can just go in there and start doing whatever you want for quick jobs. So the next thing on the list would be the auto cycle setup. So if you wanted to make, so you had a 12-foot piece and you wanted to make 14 pieces out of that, you put in 14 as your quantity. Links per load, that's how many links you have. So if I said 1, you would try and cut that one piece 14 times. If I said 3, it would make enough cuts. In this case, it would cut 5 times, and you would end up with a quantity of 14 or 15. Because it can't just stop and halfway through the bundle it finishes the cut. So whatever the bundle is, but it cuts enough to be able to reach
The
your
14
quantity.
pieces.
Right. And
Got
then
it.
you'd have a couple extra left over. The trim cut, you can do 0 trim cut, or you can do a 1/2 inch or better trim cut. Don't do anything under that. All right. The 0, well, not true, or less than the blade curve. So if the blade curve is 0.18, you can do a 0.1 trim cut. You can do a 0.12 trim cut. So it's basically what we call a skim cut. You're just taking and you're knocking off the front to make sure. Good for 1 or 2 pieces. Not so good if you have a whole row because they're different. They don't line up the same. So then you want to do a 1/2 inch or greater. The reason you do a 1/2 inch or greater is so that the trim doesn't fall back into the blade or go down in the slot and get sucked up and rattle around in your elbow over there. All right. So the trim cut, less than the blade curve or bigger than a 1/2 inch. So the links per load is the number of pieces. You got me on that one. The pack fab cutting, so you have that. So you have this delay. This is for, these 2 buttons are for your foam. All right, and since I have not seen those work, I can't explain them to you because this is something that you guys,
Yeah.
is specific to you guys.
Got it.
All right, but they're there. So they do work in the auto, when you do the auto cycle, not in the manual mode. All right, anything in the auto cycle operation does not affect the manual mode.
Okay, so how do I get to there again? Just really quick.
So if you're in machine setup, you just go to auto cycle setup,
And that'll give me that
and that
specific
brings
one,
you
right?
up to this point, right? Increment dimension, you should be able to have that also on manual operation. Yeah, kind of skipped the whole manual, but you have an increment dimension on manual too. So the increment is how far past the cut line you're gonna go. So if you want a 2-inch increment, it's actually gonna go, in this case, the curve, it's actually gonna go 2.183 inches because it has to take the blade thickness into account, the curve. So it's not gonna go, I'll show you. Probably slow that down just a little bit. So we're at 50 inches, right?
Yep.
So if I want to make a 2-inch increment, you would expect it to show, well, that's a 22-inch increment. My fingers are fat. You would expect this to move to 48, all right? It's going to move to 47
Because of that.
something, right, yeah. 4781, all right? Because it took the blade curve into effect.
Yep, yep.
It has to do that as it goes. So you can do a manual increment cut if you're just doing single cuts and you need to get it off and do something you by yourself and you need to clean them up before you make the next one, or you have to inspect every piece. Do a manual increment cut. And all you have to do is hit your index and it just moves the 2+. The go-to position, let's call 14, is where the pusher plate is. So at 14, we should be 14 inches from the back of the blade. Okay? I forget you guys have that conveyor. So when this is down like that, the conveyor runs with the back gauge.
When the
If you have it in the up position, it doesn't run.
right.
All right? Or you can manually forward and aft. So hopefully we didn't break anything. So back to the auto cycle setup. So the trim cut, 0.5. Yeah, 0.8 is fine. Whoops, I don't want the negative number in there though. Increment dimension, we could call it 10. So we would make 14 10-inch cuts. What you do at that point is go to machine operation, well, auto cycle operation. And you have to reset your list. Because over here on the list, it tells you what you're gonna do. You're gonna make part quantity 14, increments 10, right? Tells you what your trim cut's gonna be up here. Tells you how many parts have been cut, how many are left. So if you don't reset the list, say I go back to the setup and I change that to 5-inch increments and I go back to the auto cycle operation, it's still showing, well, it shows that. It may show it, but it's not gonna cut it. It's gonna cut it at the last thing that it's reset. The reset is letting it reread whatever it is that's in the auto cycle setup, all right? So your pack fab cutting is off, all right, if it's on. So that probably adjusts, that's probably exactly what it did do, was they adjusted the clamps so that the clamps come down properly onto your, that's what it's all about.
On the fab cut.
On the fab cut, right. All right. So to make it cut, you have to start your arbor. Vacuum backwards. This is too close. Let's slow it down a little bit. It's a little jumpy. Clamps have to be down in the auto mode to start. Right, so we start. So we'll move 0.8 inches. Actually probably closer to 0.1 because of the curve. Just doing a trim cut right now. Up. You have a plus or minus here. That's how fast the carriage goes back and forth. You can't change the blade speed. The blade speed's stuck at about 1800 RPM. If you watch your clamp, during the movement, they'll come up about 20 passes. So there's a material to slide under it, and they don't come all the way up. It keeps the material in place.
was a lot quicker.
Yeah.
So it's going to cut the 14 pieces at 5 inches right now.
Yeah.
That part right there.
Great. You notice it's counting. 12 to go, 2 done. It doesn't count. It doesn't count the trim cut as a cut. Okay. Now, if I wanted to, I was by myself and I was all loaded up. I got no more space and I got to clean it out. You can hit suspend after cut. And after it finishes that cut, it'll come back and sit there, not do anything. You can offload everything. Go use the bathroom, not touch anything.
Suspend after cut, which is really self-explanatory.
Well, it's just put it in hold.
Yeah.
Not stop, but hold. Okay? And then hit the resume after cut. It'll pick right back up where it started. So if you were to stop it, you would lose your count, you would lose all the other stuff. This doesn't, it just keeps going. Immediate suspend, on the other hand, brings it right back. Into a position where it's just in a hole. It doesn't know why you suspended it. It's like, okay, what do you want me to do? Just wait for you to do. At that point, you can turn off the arbor, you can do whatever it is you want to do. But that's if there's a problem or you think there's a problem.
So from there you can't continue?
Oh, you should be able to. But it stopped everything right there. It didn't come all the way back like you did in the suspend after cut. It stopped it. So if you go, oh, I don't need all these parts, or do you have to do something else? Go ahead and hit suspend after cut. He comes back to the general hold position, the weight position. On the manual page, see here's return. Comes back to the blade change position. The clamps come up, and you can turn off your arbor. Alright, it's an easy way to get everything back to where you can start all over again or do whatever it is you need to do. But so immediate suspend just keeps the clamps down, keeps everything, but the blade stays, it basically just holds on where it was. Okay, I'm stopped. Now what do you want me to do? Suspend after cut means I'm going to finish my cut, then I'm going to go back to a neutral position. I'm going to wait for you to tell me what you want to do. All right. So immediate suspend is if there's more danger. And then, of course, you have the E-stop that stops everything. Don't be afraid to use the E-stop. All right. You guys aren't cutting anything so heavy or so bad that if it stops everything right now, you're not going to hurt anything. All right. Goes into the E-stop, reset after fault. Back to your machine operation screen. Get your green light back on. Nothing happens without that button being pressed. Any questions?
Ladies, gentlemen?
You got it?
Pues me aplica.
Okay.
That's pretty much the gist of all of it. All right. So the go-to position is behind the blade. So if everything's equal and everything's right, the most accurate way to make a cut is an increment cut. Okay, because everything's done within the machine saying I have to do this, I have to do that. The go-to position, you got two pieces, you need 12 inches, and you have two little pieces that are a little over. Tell it to go to 12. You're just gonna make a single cut, or maybe two cuts, because you have two pieces. Put it in up against it, and make your cut, and that should be 12 inches. But that is totally dependent on what you put in as your back gauge caliber. So if this is off, oops, if this is off,
Your 12 inches.
your go-to is gonna be off. All right, that's why I say the increment, the only thing that's gonna affect the increment is the kerf. And the kerf's gonna be close. So you're gonna be within a couple of thou of what you're looking for. You can be a ½ inch off or more on a back gauge caliber cut, or on a go-to cut. Because if you put the wrong number in there, yeah, you can screw it up.
So right now, if you add the kerf, which is the 1.68.
The 0.18.
Yeah, 0.18, sorry. And then plus the whatever the increment would be at 2.
It would come out this way. No, to figure out the curve, to figure out the back gauge caliber, we go back to this page. I hate this system because you have to home everything every time. So it homed. Once you get it in there, it's at the home position. Go to your manual screen. Bring your clamps down. Start it forward. The extra noise is the chip selector. About 8 seconds after the armor starts, the chip selector comes up. That way they're not all trying to start at one time and you have a blackout. Cut that now. Remember, that's the machine setup. I want to make sure I'm not doing anything I shouldn't be doing. So the home position is here. I'm going to make that home position called 6 inches.
6 inches past the peak.
And you'll be able to watch the blade come right up to it before it slows down to make the cut. So if you guys go over there with the camera so you can watch, you'll see the blade come out. So I go back to the manual page, tear it forward. It's telling me that we're past the back gauge. Alright, so I gotta go in and set that up. We'll make that 2. Just because that's where, that way it doesn't think it's past the calibration point. Alright? It came out a little fast and then it slowed down to the cut speed and made the cut. Carriage return, it brings it back to the blade pinch position. If you don't have the carriage return, it comes back 2 inches behind that. So if you have the wrong size blade on there, if you have a 16-inch blade and you told it's a 12-inch blade, it's going to come back where it thinks the 12-inch, but the 16 is going to be hanging out there. You're still going to have a spinning blade sticking out this far. Not a good thing. That's why that blade thing is huge. Calipers. They were up there, you took them off. You moved it.
Yeah, but
Where'd you put it?